podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999 from a nice little cabin here in the English countryside where no one will possibly find us here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Neibart.
And I'm Phil Liskov.
And with us today, the co-creator of the Arden Podcast is Sara Ghaleb. Sara, thank you for coming on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
With Phil.
Thrilling.
Yeah. Yes.
Phil, what movie are we discussing today? I forgot.
We're talking about Bee Monkey is the film that we're talking about today. I'm pretty sure you know that, though.
The reason I forgot is because the world forgot this movie existed until a few years ago when the world remembered that Harvey Weinstein is a monster, and it became kind of a flashpoint because Asia Argento was one of the first people to publicly come out and accuse Harvey Weinstein. He raped her. That, seems to be something he did a lot, but she was brave and came out right away in the beginning and kind of set this off. So that is what this movie is kind of known for. There's, unfortunately, at this point.
It's what, it's interesting. This speaks to this, that essentially this film was to be directed by a different director, and whose name is Michael Canton Jones. He wanted to cast Sophie Okonedo, I believe is. I'm sure I'm butchering that.
She's a great actress. She's Oscar nominated.
Tremendous actress in her own right. Yeah,
Hotel Rwanda.
Correct,
and been really great in this.
Yeah, so he wanted to cast her, and Harvey Weinstein said that decided this actress wasn't "quote unquote" fuckable was the term that he used apparently, and
that doesn't sound like him.
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound like him at all. So the director and Weinstein got into a pretty heated argument about that. Long story short, director leaves, new director is brought on. The director's name, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Michael Radford, I believe is. Yeah. He comes on, Asia Argento is cast in the film, and in 2017, in the New Yorker article, she spoke of being raped by Weinstein, and she quote unquote said she felt I had to because the movie was coming out and I didn't want to anger him. It's awful. I mean, and truthfully, I think Asia Argento is quite good in this film. I'm sure that Sophie would have been great in the film as well. But it's a disgusting scenario.
Anyway, I'm so excited to talk about this fun movie.
but I will just say, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Kenny.
Look, we're not ones on this podcast to not acknowledge the bullshit around it.
Sure.
And this, to me, I said it to both of you before. I thought this film was really, really good. Really, really, really good. And this is an exercise in for me at least, in trying to separate the people involved with this and the circumstances involved in this movie and the movie I saw, which to me felt like a less ugly version of Straw Dogs, to be honest. Like, it had a lot of that energy to me, and a lot dealing with a lot of those themes. And I thought it moved really well and was pretty powerful. And I have a lot of thoughts about the film, but if we'd be insane not to acknowledge the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, please, Sarah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I watched the movie. I hadn't heard of this movie at all ever, so I watched it, and then I went to the Wikipedia page and I found out all of the Harvey Weinstein stuff, which is horrible. And I rewatched it, and I do feel like you can't entirely separate it, because what I feel is really holding this movie back is how much it objectifies Bee Monkey, the main character, and how much it kind of has, it's just super male gazy, and there is sort of like this creepy undercurrent to it that you're kind of like, why is that there? Because it kind of just feels off. And so I think on some level, like, you can't entirely forget that this is like a Harvey Weinstein situation.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I didn't like I it's also, it feels like a movie that is struggling a little bit with, it feels a little edited. It feels a little truncated at times. I think it's very stylishly directed. I think that the performances are all actually quite good in it, all things considered. And by that, I mean the sort of male gaze component. And I would also say, too, a somewhat well-worn genre, I guess, to some degree, of sort of the kind of meek male character who meets this sort of larger than life woman of a sort of criminal component who wants to leave the life for him, and then the life comes back for her and pulls her back in. There is sort of, it does feel a little bit, you know, tropey to some degree or another. But I would also say too that the performances and the characters within that framework do feel fresh. So I did appreciate that sort of component too.
I don't feel like it's that tropey. I can't think of a lot of movies that have this dynamic. Particularly, I mean, I could think of it gender swapped.
Yeah, like that's the thing, is like the idea of a criminal who wants to get out and they fall in love with a school teacher who wants to settle down is actually quite common, and it is very fun that this is switched, which is kind of like why I feel like the male gaze thing, it like feels out of place here, because like the concept of this, like on paper, seems like it's so much about like, oh, of course we're following the bank route, like the jewel heist person, the con artist. Like, of course, the school teacher character is just kind of on the side. And so, like, the fact that this movie is all in on, like, well, of course, you are the school teacher and she's this mysterious, it's like, it feels off. It feels like we're supposed to be in her point of view more than we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does feel like it's her movie, and yet Jared Harris is our POV. So
I don't feel that way at all. I don't disagree with what you're saying, Sarah, but he is our POV. It's his voiceover, and voice. Yeah, but voiceovers at the end. And no, she definitely has voiceover in it. That's true. But it's a two-hander, and I don't really feel like she's given quite the short shrift you guys think she's given. I think she makes a lot of decisions in this movie. I think she has a lot of agency in this movie. I think she drives the narrative almost entirely, and I think he is kind of not an accessory to the point that like Rebecca Ferguson is an accessory in The Town, but more of a two-hander.
Rebecca Hall. But yeah.
Sorry, Rebecca Hall.
Yeah.
In the Town, where she really is just kind of like an object.
Yeah.
But I do feel like this is a pretty straight two-hander between two characters who are given equal screen time and equal kind of weight. Now, that might not be what we want. You may want this to be completely from her POV. And that may be a function of a insecure director or an insecure producer who feels like maybe the audience won't be able to identify with a female character at the center of a bank robbery movie. I think there are like dozens of counter examples to that. And that is maybe a problem, but it didn't bother me as a viewer. It didn't bother me. I thought it was a really I did think it was a really kind of powerful story about two people who are falling for each other at different speeds. And that's something I think people are kind of afraid to talk about in stories about people falling in love, which is like, look, one of my favorite movies ever is True Romance, which is kind of the opposite of this. And that movie is about, to me, Clarence getting on Alabama's ride, right? And getting on her level. But it happens like that. It's a different kind of movie. And the whole point of True Romance, I think, is that they live in a movie, right? That the rules of real life don't really apply because Clarence has decided to be part of a movie. This is very down to earth to me. And I think the impotence part of it is really interesting. I found it kind of baffling and kind of amazing, but I think it's really interesting, this idea that he can't kind of get on her speed. And I do wonder, I did kind of wonder what you guys thought about that in terms of, the first half hour of this movie is about him not really being able to perform with her.
Sarah?
I found that kind of silly because it's like, okay, in a very straightforward way, like for the audience who hasn't seen Bee Monkey, I'm shocked that you guys haven't seen it.
I will give a synopsis in a second, but yes, go ahead. Yeah.
On their first date and then their second date, which for some reason is a trip to Paris. She's like, hey, let's go inside, and then takes off all of her clothes and is like, hey, let's bone down right now. They don't. It's like halfway through the movie before they kiss for some reason. So like it makes I'm asexual, so I don't actually know what goes on with dudes. But like I have heard that it takes, maybe more than 10 seconds to get an erection. She literally there is no build. They don't even kiss before this. And so he can't get hard, and then they immediately give up, which is like, okay.
I'll go ahead and I'll put it all out there.
This is amazing. What's happening right now?
I'll put it all out there.
They just go to sleep a minute later, and it's like, oh, you're not even going to try kissing first.
I could see Phil blushing, but I am down to put it all out there, which I think is fair. Okay. Because this is a podcast where we talk about what's going on, and I think I'll put it this way: as someone who has had, I have proof that I have had erections and climax before.
You do because I have 4 children. Yeah.
As someone who has both had erections and climaxed and not been able to have an erection, I can tell you, I know within 10 seconds. Whether it will be, what kind of night it's going to be. Does that make sense? I know within 10 seconds, and this is, I don't know the specifics of the screenwriter or the director or what Jared Harris brought to it. But within 10 seconds, you do have a sense of whether or not you're going to be able to perform that night.
That's fair.
That was very true. The idea is
if he's just sort of like, I don't want to have sex with you literally before we've had 2 conversations. And very normal perspective to have. Well, very healthy.
I'll take it. I think that's a good point because I'll take it a step further. As someone who was late to the party when it came to sex, I was often in a situation, not often, several times I was in a situation where my partner was moving faster than I was, and I didn't know how to handle that. And you try to go as far and fast as you can go, but when you're in that situation, it's often hard to be like, look, I don't, because it's not a matter of desire. It's not so much, look, I don't want to. It's more like short-circuiting, right? It's more like something happens within your body, in your head, where you're just like, I don't even know what to make of this situation, and something and it's highly embarrassing, right? And then it's highly embarrassing. So that stuff, obviously, long way of saying that stuff really worked for me because it really was reminiscent of a person who was out of his sexual league. Now, don't get me wrong, 100% for the male point of view. 100% a male viewpoint on this, and she is given almost no humanity in those sexual scenes. I understand that. So there is an issue there without question. But from his side, I thought that was really kind of well played and well observed.
So,
Well,
can
what I thought,
go ahead.
So,
Yeah,
just like what I thought was like kind of silly is like, then they dance together and they form, I guess, like, they finally go on an actual date and suddenly,
he can perform.
Suddenly he can perform, but then they have this montage of her like literally like hiding in a closet or like jumping him in his classroom, and it's like fine, and I feel like. And again, I don't actually date, so like maybe this is just like me being like, this isn't interesting to me. But I kind of wish that there had maybe been like a conversation between them where he was like, maybe other guys, are jumping you right away, but I want to take my time. Like as cliche as that scene is that I've seen like 1,000 times of just sort of like, I'll be the one who treats you right. Like I almost wish that they had like communicated. I think that would have made me more invested in the relationship, because it seemed almost like once it seems like a switch flips for him and like that's it, and there's no more reason to talk about whatever intimacy they have.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I could just tell you that from my experience, that's what happens. That's what happens.
You're the expert.
and there is actually to me like a kind of profound sadness to the way they run up after they're dancing and he, gets aroused and they run up right away. Like that's actually profoundly sad and not sexy at all. But to me, at least, this movie has a relationship to sex that I think is, again, from the male point of view, that I think is far more in line than most movies' relationships, most movie of this period's relationship with sex, which is we often see like the more toxic viewpoint of it, where sex is a means to an end. Sex is a thing that you do to brag about, that kind of thing, which certainly happened, and certainly gets seen a lot, and it's certainly something to like have your antenna up about and call out when you see it. But this is the flip side of it, which is that's this very unsexy sex that they're happening. That seems like it's some kind of hurdle. Sexy. It gets, does it get sexy? It gets emotional. Like they wind up and that is where the sexiness is, I think. They do wind up forming kind of a deep connection that I really believed. But there's something about sex in the 90s where like it becomes this barrier for entry that I think he felt acutely. I think that's what I'm getting at. And it's not something I've seen a lot. And I think that was an interesting way to play out this first act of this movie. Yeah,
I mean, first of all, I do agree with both of you here. I agree with what you're saying, Kenny, that there's a nuance and a depth to the way that they handle the sexual relationship that I appreciated for the reasons that you're talking about. Yes, this movie is seen through a male lens for sure, but I don't imagine, I certainly haven't seen many films grapple with what you were talking about, Kenny, of a man's inability to perform under the circumstances and sort of showing that vulnerability, I guess is the best way to put it, that I appreciated and I thought was really interesting. And at the same time, I do hear where you're coming from, Sarah, in the sense that I did feel a little bit like the romance was a little rushed. Again, to a point that you were making, Kenny, as to that rushed component, I think actually spoke to the Alan's inability to perform. So I think there's a lot. First of all, for our listeners, this is a lot to take in the first 10 minutes of our podcast. We've gone from like Harry Weinstein to impotence, so it's a lot. But I just
what's the point of doing these podcasts?
No, I wasn't. There's nothing wrong with anything. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
The thing about this, and think about this podcast I love, think about this movie that I really appreciated, is this does speak to something that I've experienced, that a lot of men have experienced, that a lot of women have experienced on the other side, and that isn't discussed in a way with nuance and subtlety. I'm not saying this got there, but I am saying this did get there a lot more than other movies did. Which
I agree 100%.
And my point being,
yeah.
If I don't bring what my experience is to this podcast, what's the point, right?
No, for sure. So, and by the way, I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with any of the stuff that we're talking about. I literally
just met Sarah before this podcast. Now she knows everything. But
and we know a lot about Sarah.
Much too much for no reason.
No. By the way, I very much appreciate you being as open as you have been, because I do think that your perspective and your context is important for our audience to know as well. But we very much appreciate that. I'll just say that, like, I think that this film does a lot of stuff. It's trying to do a lot, and I think that in varying degrees of success. I want to give a very brief synopsis for the people that have not seen this film, because based on its box office results, a lot of people have not seen this film.
I think we should just go sex scene to sex scene to sex scene to sex scene and then circle back to the plot.
There are like six of them.
That's kind of what the movie is, yeah.
Alan Furness, played by Jared Harris, is a young man with the perfectly proper, quiet life of a London school teacher. But beneath all of that decency lies a burning desire for excitement, and he just found it. She's a woman unlike any other, unruly Irish eyes, Latin lips. Her name is Beatrice, but on the streets they call her Bee Monkey, played by Dario Argento. She's about to take him on an outrageous, dangerous, and sexy ride through the wild side of London. There you go. Bee Monkey opened on September 10th, 1999.
Who the fuck came up with that?
I didn't write it.
I know you didn't, bro.
Bee Monkey opened on September 10th, 1999 against Stigmata, The Sixth Sense, and Stir of Echoes. It would go on to make a whopping $50,000 worldwide. Bee Monkey has 63% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 54% from audiences. I'm going to read two brief clips from two reviews. The New York Times said the best part of Bee Monkey is reveling in the dark side of Rupert Everett. The dissolute Rupert Everett drinking and drugging, destroying his chiseled good looks and recklessly putting his life in danger, which is where the second best part of Bee Monkey comes in. Jared Harris, who's becoming one of the most fascinating actors around. And then Entertainment Weekly gave it a B- and said, you may roll your eyes a bit at the glib, transparent indie grunge romanticism of Bee Monkey, but it helps to have actors as accomplished as Harris, whose acclaimed rettitude grows feistier as the movie unspools, and Argento, daughter of the cult Italian horror director Dario Argento, who looks like a Euro Winona Ryder and is just subtle enough not to overplay the babe in black leather poses. Again, did not write either of these reviews, but that's what people were saying about it. I think it's worth talking for a second about Asia Argento to a certain degree, just in terms of her father, as mentioned, famous Italian horror director Dario Argento, who's probably Suspiria is one of his biggest films. He made a lot of really crazy movies back in the day, crazy for today, let alone back in the 60s and 70s, I think, when he was making them. And there is a very sort of free spirit kind of component to Asia Argento's persona, which I think she infuses in this film. I think that she feels, just sort of like this wild child to some degree or another. I think it works really well in this film. I can't say that I've seen a lot of her work, but I do feel like she's very, very compelling, very watchable, very interesting. I don't know what you guys thought of her in the film. I'm not sure what you guys feel about her work or just in this film in particular. Okay.
I thought she was fantastic. I mean, look, I really did. I thought she was fantastic. I think that we've seen a lot of film. I mean, look, we've seen 150, 200 films here.
Something like that.
We've seen a lot of actors that I hadn't really seen their work before.
Yep.
And I really thought, look, I guess I like this movie a lot more than you guys do. I thought she really carried.
I didn't hate it by any means, just to be clear. And
I thought she carried the film. I thought she was the emotional linchpin of the film. I thought her scenes with all three of the leading men were really strong, and she had to play off them completely differently, and did a great job in that. I thought she was I totally bought her as a snatch and grab thief, and I think that I think that the screenplay gave her questionable lines, and I think she delivered them well. I think that was the dialogue was the weakest part of this movie and the script.
Yeah.
But so much, any good actor can sell any line, I think. I couldn't understand some of them with their heavy accents. So I watched with subtitles, which very often makes you really realize how bad the dialogue is. But but I really did think she brought a lot to this performance and a lot to this film. I mean, I guess the thing I'm struggling with, because I really did like it, is how manic pixie dream girlish she is. But it's different, right? Like there's a Sarah, you kind of alluded to it, or you mentioned in the beginning, there's a creepiness to this.
Yeah.
And I think whenever I see something that's about love at first sight, which is what this is essentially about, right?
Yep.
My antenna goes up, and you start to wonder, what exactly is the film trying to say here? And love at first sight, I don't really, necessarily believe that's a thing. Certainly not love at first sight. Obviously, people are attracted to other people, but you're supposed to believe that he is in love with her. So what does she represent to him? Now, that, I think that's the question of the beginning of this movie. But Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, to speak to the manic pixie dream girl aspect of it, I think people sort of took that term or that concept and they've used it as a new, liberal way to hate female characters. Because, for me, the problem with manic pixie dream girl archetype is that it's a character in a movie or a TV show who is the most interesting person, and because they would overshadow the male lead, we don't get their point of view. That, to me, is the problem with that, is it is a very interesting woman who has to stay mysterious to not overshadow the dude. The problem to me has never been those characters, it's been the presentation of those characters. And something that I think I found out on Wikipedia after watching this movie for the first time is that it was based on a book. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because I kept watching this movie being like, structure-wise, this is a book. This isn't a movie. This is a book. And that explains it. And I think we're kind of lost without her actual POV that you would get in a novel reading it.
Right.
But I think this is more fair to her than other movies could be, because we do actually we learn a bit about her family and her job and her coworkers and her roommates. So she's not just this mysterious figure. And I think the frustration that I have with this movie, and we'll get into my grade, but I really do feel like it's right down the middle, is that I can so clearly see a better version of this movie. And I feel like everything in this movie, there's either too much or too little of it, but it's just kind of walking this line where I think this movie gives her more credit than many other movies might with this type of character.
I think that there's a version of this movie. See, I guess we should talk about what your version is that's better, because my thought goes to this could have, and perhaps almost always should have, been so much worse, right?
That's
where
true. You are. There's a worse version of this movie as well. Yeah,
for sure.
the version, it's the look. I never understood Straw Dogs. Have you seen Straw Dogs?
I haven't. I'm more of a TV person, to be completely honest.
No worries. Straw Dogs is Dustin Hoffman plays a writer, takes his wife to a cabin to write something. While they're in the cabin, she gets raped by a couple of local guys. They basically and there's some other shit that I don't even want to mention. But like they basically come back and he defends his house and defends his wife and essentially turns into one of them and becomes uber violent and winds up killing them all. And I it's held up as a classic, and I don't really know why. To be honest, like, and that's what I'm getting at. Like that's the version because it's ultra violent, right? And it's
Sam Peckinpah, so it's very,
it's ultra violent, and it's you know there's a lot of allegory to masculinity and again like impotence and being able to perform and all this stuff, and the woman is the only reason his wife's character is not completely an object is because of the performance, but in every other way she's just a prize to be won or you know defiled. But I never really got that because that's what I think this movie could have been. It could have been Jared Harris turning from mild-mannered school teacher into criminal accomplice, and taking everyone down. Like, don't get me wrong, that is the plot of True Romance, but I think True Romance is very aware of what it's doing throughout the movie. I think True Romance is very aware of like kind of the pulpy confines of its film. I think it's a different thing, but this is very down to earth. Whereas I don't think either of these characters really sacrifice their integrity for the other character. I think they do meet in the middle in a way that makes me happy for both of them. It makes me comfortable with where we land. So I don't know. That's
it's funny kind of because first of all, I totally agree with you that the film does, Jared's character never turning, quote unquote, like never fully giving in to the criminal component of this film, is very much noteworthy, and it does highlight something that I don't think I appreciate you highlighting it because it's not something that I probably took note of. This film, I watched this movie literally this morning, and I really did find it kind of flummoxing, if I'm being completely honest. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't mean to suggest that it is, Kenny. I think that I just really wasn't sure what to make of it in a lot of ways, and that's I think possibly the sign of an interesting movie and not a bad movie. I think that it's grappling with a lot of stuff, but it's also sort of, as I mentioned earlier, it's really stylish. Like from the first shots of the film, I was like, okay, there's someone behind this lens and behind this camera that knows what they're doing. I mean, Michael Radford has made, several very good movies. And you can immediately see that. And so I did feel like I was in good hands. I was in competent hands. I didn't feel as though I was, that this was going to be just some sort of, weird crime, sex romp or whatever. Like it genuinely was trying to say and do stuff. I appreciate that.
And I was expecting a budget version of like a Lock, Stock, right? I thought that's where we were going based on the log line. I thought it was going to be like a female-led Lock, Stock, all about the crimes, maybe some sex and romance thrown in.
There's actually not much crime in the movie, quite frankly.
None. At best, I was hoping for a good time at the movies, and at worst, I was expecting like my least favorite type of movie, which is a bad British movie. But I think
it's no Winslow boy.
Right? It's like there's nothing but I've seen so many movies like this, not in years, right? This is something you see all the time.
This is very post-Pulp Fiction kind of like thing.
Train Spotting, Lock, Stock, Layer Cake, all that shit. It almost always feels like a dick measuring contest, these movies, right? Like even ones with female leads. It's like, who could be meaner, who could say more, more disgusting words, who has the biggest guns, who's the most vile during a robbery. And I like some of these movies. Like I love Sexy Beast. I think Sexy Beast is a great film.
Movie. Great movie.
So like it's not what I feared it would be. It actually reminds me more of a movie like The Limey. That's like kind of calm and kind of contemplative and kind of I really can't overstate how much I liked that Jared Harris's character kind of found his self in her, but didn't compromise his morals. Was willing to lose his job and was willing to kind of like change his whole life, but he held the gun up, but he wasn't going to use it unless like he 100% had to. So I want to
also, I think it's worth it. I sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it is worth mentioning too, that like the casting of this movie is really interesting. Okay. Like the idea that your criminal trifecta is Asia Argento, Rupert Everett, and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. Those are three people that I never imagined I would see in a scene together. And I felt they're all very different energies. And then Jared Harris, who also has a very different energy. I think that their first dinner date scene is really interesting because of the energies that they're bringing to it. The dialogue we've all mentioned, the script is fine. Like, and I'll just, it's whatever. But I think that they had a really interesting energy. What did you think about that, Sarah?
Well, you bring up, both of you brought up something that I feel like I do kind of want to commend this movie for, which is that something I did really love about this film, and I didn't hate it. Like, the problem is I feel like it's so close to being a movie I love. Like, that is kind of the frustration that like,
sure.
It's very far from being a terrible movie, but it's
100%.
It's got so much good stuff that I wish that they had just dived in on. Something I love about this movie is none of the criminals are remotely intimidating. Like, just the largest, biggest guy in the movie is the one who is presented as a total helpless dope who, throws up on himself and like,
oh my God,
can't hold a gun or whatever. Like, that is the physically largest criminal guy. And then the big scary guy that like everyone is hiding from just looks like a middle manager. Like,
he has some rough hair going on.
Yeah, and I like that because, like, realistically, that's probably what criminals look like. I mean, if you are breaking into a bank and then people can't describe you later, it's probably because you look normal.
Just as an aside, are you watching the This Is a Robbery on Netflix?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, I haven't, but I just
Thief?
Finished the Last Scene podcast about the Gardner heist thing. I'm really into heists right now, actually. I'm glad I watched this movie because I'm on a real heist kick.
It's just funny you should say that about the composite sketches, because that comes up. I'm enjoying that quite a bit. I love heists too. It's also nice. The nice thing about heists versus all these other true crime podcasts, documentaries, or whatever is no one died. So exactly. It's not some grisly murder. It's there's that whatever, But I agree with you. A movie we did that did this really well was Ghost Dog, because Ghost Dog didn't ever glamorize its thieves, its criminals, its gang members, the really mafia guys. They made them goofs, not even like buffoons, just like, and then not like idiots, just like guys that you just wouldn't want to be around because they're just ugh. And I felt that with this movie too. Even Rupert Everett, who like is basically the guy you'd most want to be around, certainly in like his more charming roles, and we've already done a couple this year. Like we've already done Midsummer Night's Dream, and we already did Ideal Husband. Like, this guy is like dripping charisma, and even that, like when he shows up to their house, you're like, oh. Are you here to ruin the movie again? You're like, so I think
I liked his energy.
Myers.
I liked his energy.
I don't mean that in bad. I don't mean that he's here to ruin their moments. That's all I mean.
Yeah.
And I think they weaponized his charisma really well, because
I do too.
Oh, that is a guy who you follow around for a few years, and then after a while, you're like, oh, wait, there's nothing under there.
Yeah.
It's just that surface level charisma, and I got completely taken in.
Yeah.
So I thought that was
and they
really
did that
good
really
casting
nicely in the beginning with the dancing, with their kind of like three-way dancing.
Yes.
You get how she's taken with him. You get how Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is taken with him. Like,
I gotta say, you've mentioned it. Midsummer Night's Dream, An Ideal Husband, this film. I honestly, Rupert Everett's one of the guys, or one of the people at a 99 that I'm one of the most bummed that he didn't have a career, like that a career didn't manifest. Now, I'm sure there were any number of reasons for it, but just a
You know
tremendous
the reason for it. You
Sure.
can say it.
I mean, it's unfortunate that, you know, him being openly gay hurt his career. It seems like that was the case. And I think
It's definitely the case.
It's definitely
and that's clearly what happened. And it's horrible.
It
You
is.
know, it's
Absolutely.
horrible.
Because I got to say, the guy is so tremendously talented. You know, he just brings this really interesting charisma that especially in the scenes he has in this, just even a shot of him when they come into their house, I guess it's midway through the film, and he has basically trashed their house for all intents and purposes, their apartment, and he's sort of like sitting in the corner, and you've got like the sunlight streaking in, and he just looked like this wounded animal that's just kind of like just sitting in the corner. You know, his clothes are, he's, you know, hasn't shaved, his hair's all mussed up. Like, he's just got this very sort of broken quality in this, and yet at the same time you could see yourself absolutely being taken in by whatever he's selling you. It's really, he's a really special actor, and unfortunately we didn't see enough stuff from him. That's
absolutely. He spends so much of this movie kind of like sulking or like
yeah
just kind of like in a heap on the floor, or like just like not like very non-charismatic physical body language things of just sort of like, oh, I'm just sort of like hunched over on the couch.
Yeah.
And yet he's so magnetic at the same time. Like, he doesn't have to do anything.
I agree. And I also, sorry, go ahead.
He's at that moment. We're seeing him at that moment where he goes from confident to self-conscious, right? We're seeing him at that moment. Well, like the fact that he has all these pictures on his piano of him and with celebrities he sells drugs to. He was once let in. He was once everybody's best friend. He was the dealer. And now it's falling apart for him at this very moment. And I mean, those are always narratives I like. I always like the idea of fall. I always love falls from grace because I think I think it's pretty profound to have and then have lost. And I think seeing how desperate he is at the end, where I think he really just comes up because he misses her. I mean, he calls her Benny, right? Like, he has a nickname for her, and he really cares about her. And you know what else it was reminiscent of? And this is another thing I like about it is the Sharon Stone, James Woods storyline in Casino. That idea of it can be very hard for two people to try to make it when they're from two completely different walks of life, because people have pasts and people and pasts catch up to you. That's
the
true
codependence
no matter what,
of it, for sure. Yeah, that
it's
codependence.
true no matter what. But in this particular case, like, she is actively trying to, like, quote unquote, go straight. She says earlier, I have a straight job. Yep. And that's clearly very hard because she was the codependency. They were parasites, right? They were just parasites on her. And it's very hard for her to, not feed them. So.
And I think that folds into the Bruno character, the Jonathan Rhys-Meyers character too. I mean, this guy who's been sort of, it does feel like the world has kind of metastasized to him, the criminal underworld, if you will, and just this idea.
And he's only 18.
Yeah. So there's and his his
he's
feelings for Asia Argento's character. He does a really great job as well. I mean, again, it's a pretty stacked cast. And I have to say, too, Jared Harris, who has obviously had an incredible career, and the range of stuff he's capable of doing, unbelievable. But there's something about him in this film, this vulnerability, this intellect, all of it that's very much on the surface that you see in, obviously he's incredible in Mad Men. His performance as Lane, and that is unbelievable. He's very good in The Terror. He's good in Chernobyl. Like, he's just a guy that you can always rely on and knows is going to give you a three-dimensional performance. And he is tremendous in this. What are your thoughts on Jared Harris, Sarah?
Oh, I love him. I just finished The Terror, and he's incredible in it. I will say it was really weird to see this movie, like, just to see, like, little baby Jared Harris. Because,
he's so young in it.
He, God, I hope he doesn't listen to this. But, like, he
I
looks,
highly doubt it.
he looks way worse somehow. Like him being young looks
Back
wrong
then?
on him. It doesn't.
Oh.
I feel like he's supposed to be 40, and him young
That's fair.
just looks like when they kind of like put a wig on an older person to play herself in a flat. It just looks off. And I say that as like someone who does think adult Jared Harris is like very sexy and like
Interesting.
you know a character actor way. He's got a great voice, which the movie very smartly is like, let's just have him talk a lot because he's got an amazing voice. I think it was very brave of him to take a role where they say more than once that the character is ugly, but at the same time has nude scenes. I think that's very heroic of any actor to attempt. To be like, cool, well, I'm playing an uggo and you are going to see all of me and I'm comfortable doing that. Very brave. I
want to talk about that more.
Well,
No, go ahead, Sarah.
I do also want to say, like, given that the premise of this movie is that this supermodel, beautiful, exciting con artist woman gives it all up for in a text, incredibly average looking like school teacher, I do feel like Jared Harris is the kind of the only guy with the sort of built-in charisma and gravitas where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm on board. Like I
agree with that.
That's pretty much what I was going to say. That's essentially what I was going to say. I guess I pretty much agree with everything you're saying. I do think that they purposely lower your expectations, saying he's funny looking and putting him next to her. Because I did like pretty quickly start thinking, maybe after they had sex or maybe they were naked together or whatever, I did pretty quickly start thinking like, no, they look okay together. Like this isn't crazy. They look like a pair. Like I see it. So it's hard. Like it's an incredibly like fine needle to thread. But I think they did it. And I found him very like strangely attractive in this movie. Considering I'm not like you, I think like Lane is like not a good looking guy. And I think older Jared Harris, very charming, totally understand why like a person would want to, spend their life with him because he seems great. But no, he does read funny looking to me, but not in like a Buscemi way, more in like a Karen Hansboy kind of way. Does that make sense, Phil?
Yeah. No,
I'm sure he's
definitely a Karen boy for sure. I do think, and I'm just I was like cycling through Jared Harris roles in my head. He does feel like a guy who's often cuckolded.
Yes, he's like, yes. That's right.
And that's his lane. And I don't, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that like Lane's character on Mad Men has a similar energy to this in the sense of him there's a powerlessness to that he's emanating, and yet he does have charisma and control. It's this weird push and pull that's interesting.
Well, I think he's a very settled performer. Like I feel like anytime I'm watching him, like regardless of the circumstances he is in, because often in Mad Men and definitely in the Terror when everyone's fucking dying, like he is like kind of like there is a finite amount of stuff I can do about the situation, but like he always seems sure of himself, which I think is also why like
there's a confidence in that for sure.
I loved him playing. I think he's my favorite performance of Moriarty in
he's very good in the Sherlock Holmes.
And he played like a villain on Fringe, and I think that's like why he's a good villain is because like when I feel like if you were to sit down with the negotiation with Jared Harris, you would just immediately be like, fuck, that guy knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah, smart.
And I think that's I still really in this movie, I don't think it sold me enough on the relationship, on what they kind of both wanted, especially considering that like in the first monologue he says that he wants an exciting life and then he's never into it at any point an exciting life is offered.
It's true.
But
point.
since the script fails to sell you on he represents stability, I think Jared Harris steps up to the plate on doing that on his own.
I think that, it's funny you bring up negotiations, because another role that he's tremendous in is the Kelly Reichardt film Certain Women. He's I guess one of the male characters in that film, or one of the male leads in that film. But he's just I don't know how he does it, but this conveying confidence and weakness at the same time is a real talent. Like there's this, truthfully, I think it's just, there's a humanity to him, and we all contain multitudes, and thus he conveys that in a way that I find really fascinating.
Well, in Mad Men, for instance.
Correct. Yeah.
In Mad Men, for instance, it's so nuanced and so smart, but by virtue of his position, he has the confidence. He should have confidence going into every room, knowing that he's protected and that his voice matters. But by virtue of being an outsider and being in a room filled with your, John Hams and John Slatterys, he also probably feels, and this is, this does have something to do with the way he looks, but also something to do with the fact that he's British, and something to do with the fact that those guys were like, fucking American charisma, like up to 1,000. Like that, those are hard fucking guys to contend with. And he played that so well. This, like, again, don't mean to use the word, but this impotence next to these American guys. And I don't think that was by accident. I think that was like, I think that was very built in on a meta level, on a allegorical level of Britain's relationship with America at this point of time, particularly when it came to messaging, particularly when it came to, keep calm and carry on versus we're going to stick a boot up your ass. I think that there's something to that. And I think that part of the reason I like Jared Harris so much in everything he does is because I love the quiet dignity of keep calm and carry on. I love the quiet dignity of like someone who, knows that he has the goods and in the right situation presents himself in the best possible light. But he has always had trouble with someone, I'm not saying the actor, but his characters always have trouble with someone who tries to out-alpha him. And that's a really interesting kind of place to be. And something I really love about this movie, which is like the alphas go down and his hold the line thing, is kind of what wins the day. Now, it, again, doesn't change the fact that this movie completely becomes his movie at the end, and he does kind of save Asia Argento at the end. And there is that kind of like, he became her port in the storm. But I do think that that's an unusual kind of, maybe it's a European sensibility, maybe it's a British sensibility. It's certainly not something an American would do, but this idea of might doesn't always make right. Sometimes right makes right,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think almost that is the flip side of the stability I was talking about, of like, he, in this movie, you mentioned like, he doesn't compromise, like he's willing to like, just sort of like, he'll lose the job if he loses the job. He's not going to like do something dishonest to keep it. And I think like you see that in Mad Men, or like to some extent, like the terror of just sort of like, and it's very present here of like, knowing who you are can put you at a real disadvantage if you are dealing with a wild card, which is exactly what's happening here. It's what happens on Mad Men, where he's like, he can't really go up against Don Draper, because Don Draper, you never know what that dude's going to do, because he doesn't know who he is. And B, in this movie, she also, sometimes she's a sweet little kitten and sometimes she's a tiger, because like, she's figuring that out for herself. She's young and she's come from this world, and he's kind of can't predict her in the way that she can she kind of is wrong when she tries to predict him, because she assumes that he also can zig and zag and he can't. And I think this movie, in terms of if we were just talking about its role in Jared Harris's filmography, I think is very interesting for like really encapsulating that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I think there's something very sort of when I think about how sort of stable he is, if that makes sense. You said it yourself, Kenny, that neither of them, I mean, I guess B to some extent does, I don't want to say evolve because that makes it sound as though she wasn't evolved to begin with, but she does change a little bit, it feels like, by the end of the film, right?
Yeah,
that
she has an arc.
She has an arc. Yeah. And I don't feel like he does. And that's not a hindrance on the film necessarily. I like the fact that he's solid. I like the fact that he knows who he is and he knows his rules and he knows sort of where he wants to land. And I appreciate that she doesn't. And that's what makes her exciting.
And he also doesn't, he doesn't actively try to change her or save her.
Correct.
He doesn't judge her for, her tattoo or tagging her, even when she says armed robbery. And I mean, she does say she's kidding, but he's not. That's not what this movie is about. It's not her going to do one more job and him pulling her back and saying, if you do one more job, I won't be here when you come home. That's just not what's going on here. It's now, don't get me wrong. Like, maybe
I felt like it really was.
Well, maybe
I got that impression a lot from the movie, that he was kind of like, no, I'm the sensible adult and you need to stop this and I'm not going to put up with it. Like, that was very much the vibe I got from that relationship.
Well, what pushed him over the line was when she went and either threatened or hurt the mother of the kid who,
Right.
And this is
school. Yeah.
Yeah, the kid at school who was threatening his job. And yeah, I mean, I do think there's a question of like, okay, so it's on one hand, it's good that he doesn't say anything. On the other hand, she is a danger to herself and to him and to people around him. And what's the reasonable response to that? Walking away or trying to help or what? At that point, you do get into a bit of a moral and ethical situation. How much is appropriate to go to help to change someone you love when you obviously only know what you're told and what you see about this person? You don't know the 99% of their life that's outside of you. So it's.
I think he has a very reasonable reaction to all of her crime stuff. And in fact, I like the fact that he forgives her is, he's very generous with his forgiveness because she involves him in a lot of stuff that he could go to serious jail for. And she is the reason why a bunch of armed people show up at his home. Not everyone appreciates their spouse causing them to have to bury bodies.
Bruno buried the body.
I'm not.
It's all Bruno's problem.
Too harsh on him. I just feel like part of this is, we see the fight and then we don't really see them make up. Like they decide to forgive each other on their own time off screen, which is like, okay. But like, there's that scene when Rupert Everett shows up at the house where he's like, you're always asking me to prove that I love you and I'm always doing it and you never do anything. And in my head, I was like, you have made all these decisions for, like, Jared Harris decided to move to the country and accept a new job, which is kind of the only, like, that's a big sacrifice, but that is one that it was completely his idea. Mm-hmm. And then meanwhile, she has cut herself off from all of her friends, her family, her support network. They were bad people, but it's still like a sacrifice. She gave up her job in the city. She moved from London to a fucking cabin in the middle of nowhere where you see that she doesn't have any friends in town. She doesn't have her own car. She has to walk into town. Like,
she seems happy though.
So because he says that, she has to kick out her only friend who is in danger. And it's like, okay, it's a bad situation. And I'm not saying that, she is the one who was right. I just felt kind of frustrated to be like, I don't know, dude, if you were dating a person who shoots other people, you can't be like shocked when they're that person anymore.
Yeah,
it's true.
I mean, I like that. I like that scene outside.
It didn't sell me enough.
I like the scene outside. It felt real to me. I felt like they both kind of stated their case, and neither was particularly wrong. Again, like to so many fights in couples have to do with the 1% you actually know about the other person. and assuming that, you know, the rest of it doesn't even exist, right? The only thing that matters is what the person is giving to you and what you're giving back to that person. And I do think that this was the one moment where he did feel at once selfish and also kind of demanding that he be seen within the context of this relationship without recognizing how much she was giving to him in her way.
Yeah.
And that's, I think does kind of like speak to, you know, this last, to me, it was kind of that last hurdle between two people who still haven't quite met in the middle.
I think, I mean, Kenny, the connection that you made earlier to true romance, I think is an apt one, in the sense of it's sort of this idea of two people from two very different worlds, you know, the criminal world sort of colliding in the middle of that, and two people trying to sort of see if they can coexist. I think is really compelling, and I think is quite well done in this, despite the fact that, you know, I do agree with Sarah that I do wish that there was a little bit more meat in those earlier scenes prior to the sex stuff. But I still, you know, looking back on this now, I do think that there's a lot more here, and that I just wasn't really sure how to process all of it, because I just felt like AJ Argento was just like naked for like so much of this movie.
So much.
She is naked a lot in this movie. And
she
at
shot a
times,
guy
like,
naked.
but also like there's scenes where she's naked where she doesn't need to be naked. There's just like, she's just like,
they're just like chatting.
they're just chatting. She's just lying on a bed. You're like, what's happening?
It's obvious that Radford either was told explicitly or felt a lot of pressure to put a lot of her completely naked body in this movie.
Correct.
And that is troublesome, mostly because you don't know whether it was an artistic decision or whether it was a
totally,
I guess, a commercial decision, though I, you know, hesitate to use that term, but like just in terms of Radford's survival as a director. But here, I want to say one thing about True Romance, because the reason I love True Romance, and I think it's a better film than this, is because everything that happens in this movie is absurd. And I love that because I love watching a movie. But this movie is attempting to say, no, this is totally normal shit. Like, no. This is some normal shit that happens to some normal people. Where True Romance, like, puts it out there on Front Street, which is from the moment, like, Clarence basically, like, steps into this movie and Elvis is, you know, half behind him and he works in a fucking comic store. So you're, like, steeped in the mythology of heroes and villains. It's like, you're going to be in a movie from step one, and everything that happens from here on out is going to be heightened to the max. So, like, enjoy it, which I'm crazy about. But and so I the rules are so much looser in a movie like that. But I still do think, despite the fact that everything in here is quite ridiculous, the emotional content of this movie worked for me like gangbusters. So it's it's interesting. As I mentioned, watched the film earlier this morning and sort of, I guess I don't really know what I thought it was. That's not true. I think I thought it was just sort of a shitty crime movie and that there was some sex in it. Which is not a crazy thing to think, considering no one fucking ever has heard of this movie. And you assume it's some basic fucking direct-to-DVD situation. But, and then, reading up on sort of the Michael Radford of it all too, which is that he was going through a divorce and it was essentially a gun for hire gig. And he was just like, I need to get paid. And to your point, Kenny, I agree with you. I'm sure he was just at the whim of whatever Weinstein wanted. Harvey wants. Yeah, whatever he wants. Sure, I'll do it. But, all of that being said, I think that even with a script that was, let's say a B- script, I do think that he found some depth. I think he cast it really well. And I think that he found a better movie in this than, quite frankly, the script probably deserves. That's exactly how I feel. I want to ask a question to you guys.
have you ever heard about a DJ at a hospital? Is that a thing? Because I'm not sure I've ever heard of that before.
Okay, can we talk just here is I think maybe the main thing that just made it difficult for me to emotionally connect to this movie or root for this couple at all is all like in the opening monologue of the movie. Jared Harris's character, Alan Furness, which I want to go on record, Alan Furness is an equally stupid name to Bee Monkey. The worst name I've ever heard. They are the two worst names I've ever heard in the same movie.
Bee Monkey's the worst. Bee Monkey's so bad.
But like,
I hate it so
here's
much.
our average protagonist, A Furness. Fuck you. A Furness? Fuck you. But he says in the opening like voiceover thing that the DJ booth at the hospital where he works nights is the only, and I quote, the only place in town where my kind of records are welcome. And he is talking about classic jazz albums. And then like an hour into the movie, you find out that they're in London.
Yeah, they don't play classic
what town
jazz.
is this? This is so weird. Like, so there's jewel heists, but also like there aren't any jazz clubs. And then you find out that it's London and you're like, you know what happened here. Alan just doesn't have any friends.
No one wants to listen to his
telling
records.
him about cool clubs because I guarantee you could find good jazz performances in London. Oh, you find so sick.
I mean,
I hate protagonists who love jazz.
It's such a way to show that your white dude protagonist like is interesting, and it's
it's the worst.
It's the worst part of La La Land, quite frankly.
Listen to
of course,
music that current black people are making. You could just do that.
Too.
It is.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
This movie,
it's
honestly,
love and theft. It's like
the more you defend it, the more I feel like this movie is actually quite embarrassing.
I'm not embarrassing that. I kind of forgot that pretty quickly. Like how much if you could see
the movie forgets it, quite frankly, too.
My running log of the movie
I had to
basically.
Buy it, so
Oh, you bought it. You own Bee Monkey now.
I bought it, and now it's the only purchase I have on Amazon Video, which makes me look like some kind of pervert.
No,
not a pervert.
But I've seen it 2.5 times to get my money's worth, and it's
that's amazing.
A clunker. Here's the thing. There's an earnest. I'm decided. We're getting in late in this movie. I started very generous, and I'm like, you know what? We need to have a contrarian on here.
Yeah.
It's a humiliating film. There's an earnestness to this film that makes you feel like a college student wrote it, because it's such their idea of what it's like to be an adult is so laughable. Bank heists on a lunch break. Jared Harris is like, oh my God, I'm so poor. I can only afford this amazing houseboat to live on. And then he's so scared about his job and the financial prospects that instead he gets them a cabin in the countryside. A full house. They own a full house. And that's how you know that he's giving stuff up to be with her. So they move into... The fact that
hey, you didn't like it. What can you say?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Everything about it is ridiculous.
I'll say this. I think that part of it too is that I think it's a pulpy script. Like, I think that the script is trying to kind of be this mashup of a bunch of different genres. I don't think any of us are necessarily writing for the script. I think the script is
dialogue.
But I'll just say to your point, Sarah, that I think part of it, the reason that it works is that somehow I do feel like Radford kind of flattens it out in a way. And I don't mean that sounds negative, but like somehow makes it feel symbiotic a little bit so that it doesn't feel as jarring as when you say those things in sequence. I agree with you. They all sound insane.
Right. Of
but
course.
Then when I watch it in the actual film itself, it does feel of a piece somehow. So it doesn't feel as like, I made fun of the DJing at the hospital because I think that's fucking stupid and dumb and they kind of sweep it under the rug pretty quickly as well. But it also just sort of feels like kind of pointless. But going to the cabin at the end is also sort of like, I mean, we've all seen the heist movie or the whatever that ends at the cabin
like
up
Skyfall.
north or something. Or whatever. And that's fine. I'm fine with that. But you were going to say something, Kenny.
No, I don't have anything else to say. I mean, like, I think you said it really well. There are like a lot of things out of context that are absurd, and there are also a lot of things in context that are absurd. Yeah. But to me, at least, it wasn't absurd to the point where I was offended by it. Now, certainly no knock if you were, but it didn't like distract me. Like, certainly the stuff that is a lot harder to take is the stuff we talked about this whole podcast, which is, the any film that feels like it's not made by an artist or a group of artists for the sake of artistry, or conversely, by a group of mercenaries for the sake of commerce, does feel like it puts you in a very weird place mentally. And particularly a film like this, which was, I believe, at the very least, conceived as a piece of art, and then bought by a mercenary, and then turned into something that he thought he could sell, and he failed at that, which is great in its own weird way, makes it even more uncomfortable. But the final product to me was a pretty cohesive piece. A very cohesive piece to me, a very cohesive piece that made sense, and I wasn't bored at all. So that's just kind of where I land. But
I'll say two quick.
As such.
I'll say two quick things. The first is I agree that I was never bored. For what that's worth, I felt like it moved at a quick clip. And I was entertained. Now I also didn't buy this film. So I imagine on some level.
How didn't you buy this film?
Couldn't you just rent it on Amazon like we did?
Oh, well, you could rent it. Yes, you could rent. I thought that's but
I wanted the time frame that I knew I could watch it was just out of the window of like, if I need to rewatch this on Sunday night.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Fair enough.
I might as well buy it.
I just feel bad that you
only available. I was like, I just went, you know what? I lived my life with optimism, and there you go.
At the very least, it's better than the movie Bee Monkey Sounds, right?
Yes.
True. Yeah.
Yes.
I will say, definitely this movie believes in itself very firmly, which I think is...
That's true.
Again, almost the thing that I find frustrating is that like it's so confident that you will like watch this movie and be like, oh, and of course, everyone is immediately obsessed with Beatrice because we cast a beautiful actress. And she is very beautiful and she is very magnetic. But like, then it just doesn't feel like it has to do the work because it's so sure. It's like, oh, and of course you're on this side and of course you agree with this and of course, like, and it's, I appreciate that charisma, and I think maybe if I saw this in a movie theater, I would totally buy it. But like watching it just in my living room, I was kind of like, I almost wish that you had asked a few more opinions before you just. Honestly, this seems like a too many cooks situation. Reading about sort of the post.
Oh, sure.
Like, that I'm convinced. I think the lead actress does a good job. Given that it is a bad script and she's not a native English speaker, which I think is a very cruel thing to do, to give dialogue that doesn't make any sense to a non-English speaker.
Fair point.
Which is not, my dad is an immigrant to America. Like, I'm not in any way what are they speaking? That's 0% a point of view that I've ever had.
Of course.
And she definitely carries it with charisma, but I think like you can see her struggle a bit because the sentences she's saying don't make any fucking sense.
I do think that I think that there's something to you when you guys brought up the manic pixie dream girl thing, which I think is interesting. I thought what both of you said was really interesting, and I never thought of the manic pixie dream girl through the lens of empowerment. You know what I mean? This idea that that the female character being more interesting, being seen as an inherently bad thing, I think is an interesting perspective that I never thought of before.
That's not what it is, though.
No, I'm not suggesting that necessarily that's what is happening here. Manic Pixie Dream Girl is, to me at least,
an unwillingness to flesh out a character for whom you've been given, to whom you give a few interesting, exciting traits, but mostly just to serve as a, romantic interest for your male characters. And it's
okay.
If there was a character that was more, empowering is not the word, but I feel like any character that was more fleshed out would no longer be a manic pixie dream girl. She would be a character that you would describe in other ways.
Well, so I just, apropos of it just happened to be on television the other day, I watched 500 Days of Summer again, which I quite liked when it came out, and I still quite like it. But there are things that bump me about it. But the manic pixie dream girl component, this idea of the quote unquote sad sack beta male who doesn't know how great he is until said woman comes into his life to invigorate him and give him confidence and allow him to sort of see the error of his ways. That's the manic pixie dream girl. At least that's how I've always defined it to some way or another. And I don't think that that's what's happening here. In fact, I think what's interesting about this is what we said earlier, which is that Alan stays the same.
Yeah.
She doesn't actually change him.
I think that 500 Days of Summer, to its credit, is somewhat of an inversion of that trope. I think at the end, when she, declares herself to be a full character and that she's not here to fix him, I think that does kind of blow up the idea of.
I totally agree. Yes,
but I respect that about that movie a lot.
Yes,
so.
I think that I think the two examples that everyone kind of points to is Elizabethtown and Garden State are the two most sort of glaring examples.
Pretty bad one, yeah.
Wait, I heard 500 Days of Summer get a lot of shit for that, and I think.
But I think what Kenny said is interesting.
Right. Yeah.
That they do kind of invert it by the end.
Oh yeah. No, I liked it, and I liked her character, but what I was like, what I mentioned earlier of just sort of like the awareness of that trope becoming a new way for people to shit on women.
Yes,
I really saw with 500 Days of Summer, where like suddenly Zooey Deschanel was like, so many people were making fun of her for being, like that and being quirky and thinking that she could just, but like. It shows that people watch that movie and just took every single thing at face value, and they were like, fuck her for that. And it's like, no, it's a movie about how she is a full person and her boyfriend will not listen to her or pay attention to who she really is. Like, that is the point of that movie. And yet people left that movie just excited to have a new reason to be sexist in a way that made it sound like they read.
I also think that Zooey Deschanel also became the crosshairs just were on her.
Also,
you know what I mean? Like,
you know,
you know what I mean? Like, there's she and him, and then there's her being adorkable for New Girl. Like, all of that stuff kind of compounded all of these things. I think, and people just, and I don't hold any of that against her. I just think that people did. And they used it as an example. So, but I do think
they held it against her because she was good at what she did, and they built the whole show around this character. And then people decided that it's exactly what you're saying, Sarah. What I think people decided that, oh my God, we don't want them to have full formed lives.
Yeah,
that's too much. Yep. A person like this is only a prize to be won, and maybe change the male protagonist. So I hate that stuff. I hate when some actor kills it in a role and then becomes a big actor and then everyone gets mad about it. It's pretty disgusting.
It sucks because it's like it kind of falls into the category, and I hate when this happens too, where it's like you find this band and you love this band, and then they become popular and people hate on the band because all of a sudden they're popular. We're just like, but they haven't changed. You liked it before. Like, what? Anyway, I hate shit like that. But do you want to rate this film, Kenny? Are you? Do you want to go first?
Wait,
I'd love to hear you. I'd love to.
Sarah, you got something?
Wait, I'd like us to talk a little bit about the secondary couple of this movie, Rupert Everett and Jonathan Rhys Meyers. I will say, like, I was watching this whole movie being like, how have I never heard of a movie that is Rupert Everett and Jonathan Rhys Meyers play a jewel heist canon couple that like has a physical relationship, and then we get to the end where one of them kills the other, and you're like, oh, that's why none of my gay friends recommended this film to me.
There's something to that, yeah.
I think that's sort of what I speaks to about for some reason, this movie goes all in. I mean, I know the reason. We all know the reason. But this movie goes all in on a hetero couple. Yeah, a straight male point of view when it's like such a shame because like it's so fucking interesting and rare and refreshing to see like a queer polyamorous like friend group and they're stealing jewels and they're dancing around with each other and they're all very beautiful and like that's so fun and refreshing. And then it's like, oh, but the point of view of the movie, the perspective of the movie is just like doesn't really get it.
Well, it just doesn't really go there. It may be, sorry, go ahead.
It's such an aside. Even though it's such a big part of the film, it's also, you can kind of feel like the movie makers don't really care that they've got this, at the time, very rare to see, like pretty big actors playing like an actual gay couple, especially one that has some sort of weird polyamorous thing going on.
I do think that this is troublesome in its own right, but they weren't a couple to me. Rupert Everett was dating a child, and he turned 18 in the movie. He was a runaway that I think Rupert Everett took.
I didn't know he was 18 in that scene. Okay,
yeah.
I will say laws in England are different. That's do not date a child. That is disgusting.
But it's not. I mean, of course it is. Of course it is like partially that, but
yeah, I thought he and Oregna were like basically the same age. So I
think it was his 18th birthday. They said at the bar, but that's but no, but I'm not like, but I'm not standing here being like, I got you. It's not that. It's more that he was. It's more that he was a runaway, and more that he was so vulnerable, and that he was being taken advantage of, and essentially. But kind of like Olivered into a life of crime to some extent. And I do feel like that, his kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? At the expense of this potential gay romance, which could have been interesting if done differently. You did have the story of essentially like, an abused kid who found his freedom and kind of did away with his abuser. But that's how I looked at Rupert Everett's character as a real kind of creepy Bill Sykes type who takes in these runaways and sleeps with them and has them do crimes and, deals drugs. But I
definitely think it's problematic. Like, again, like it ends with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers killing the guy that he's being physically intimate with, which is just sort of like a really dark place to go. And I think that is kind of like the thing of like, it opens and, you see them dancing and they're all having a good time. And I like immediately I'm like, oh, I'm going to love this movie. And then it just like, it's just like, no, we're not. And it doesn't even kind of get into like, not that you need to spell out that someone who is sleeping with a teenager is like the bad guy, but the movie plays it so normally that it feels like it's sort of hard to get on the level of like, there's just, I think with those actors and with the amount of screen time it has, I think it was a real missed opportunity to have not terrible representation. And I think that is also kind of how I feel about like, not to bring the fucking Brechtel test into this, but like she doesn't even have any like female friends. She asks her boss if she can go out of town and like, that's it. Like she doesn't have friends that aren't part of a sexual relationship. Rain? Yeah. Like
yeah, she does.
She goes from the couple she's sleeping with to Jared Harris, who she's sleeping with, and she doesn't have outside people.
Yeah.
And I think that's just another like thing of like, well, you know, the straight male point of view.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking to, I always have this kind of, there's always this kind of push and pull, particularly with older movies, but it happens now all the time too, when it comes to representation, because at one point, in one sense, you have a responsibility to tell the best story you can tell. And if you've decided that the best story you can tell has a gay couple that's represented this way, okay, fine. On another level, so many movies made by straight white men that have gay couples in it, and tragically for those gay people, whether it's through violence or whether it's through AIDS or some kind of other thing that kind of has this like undercurrent of, well, that's what happens if you go gay. So there is this like, it's hard. I actually think it's hard to like, I think it's hard to critique these movies alone, because in and of itself, I didn't have that issue with this movie. But
it all made sense in the film.
Context, yeah. But taken like it's placed within the fabric of movies, particularly Weinstein movies. Movies in 1999, we've seen so many of them where like being gay is something to be laughed at or something to be feared or something to be fearful of or fearful for. It is one of those things, and at this point in time, 1999, kind of the main thing that, you know, there should have been some more sensitivity. I agree with you in how you tell this story, and less kind of like a cautionary tale. But
and like in a weird way, like, okay, I do want to be, you know, self-aware, like acknowledge that a movie that I watch in 2021 now it's not going like it was made 2 decades ago. Like I understand that it is not going to be as progressive as we have gotten. Like we have moved further, and I don't want to like hold it to exactly the same standards or to hold it to the same tropes that have developed since then, and then like suddenly punish this movie from 1999. But I think the thing that I couldn't really let go of mentally with this is that I feel like, given that this movie ended up kind of being a huge bomb, I think it could have had cult status if it was a movie that was made to kind of be like a, not necessarily like a camp movie, but like a movie that was designed to be for women and for the queer community and have this kind of like pulpy, fun, sexy vibe to it. Yeah. But it's so much about how, you know, it's so much about assimilation. Like I couldn't stop thinking about how much it was about assimilation with like her, you know, no one says her name correctly. And she has to learn how to be domestic. And the end of the movie, the happy ending of the movie is her learning to blend in with these British ladies, which is like fine. But like, I think this movie would have found its audience if it had kind of had a more fun queer attitude about it. Like, I think it could have had like a nice little cult status, and it didn't. And I think that is the thing that breaks my heart when I see old stuff, that like, oh, you guys were so afraid of not having white men see this movie that you kind of ruined it for everyone, and then white men didn't show up, so then you were screwed.
Yep.
Yeah, I think with the title like Bee Monkey, you pretty much already
they should not have kept that title. It's a terrible title. It really puts you off. It tells you nothing about the film.
It's upsetting to me. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like if the title is upsetting to me. It sounds like it's for children. Yeah.
It sounds like a children's movie.
A furnace, bee monkey.
But the other thing is yes, but it also makes me think of Spanking the Monkey, not the movie, not the action. And
that's true. Yeah, it does almost feel like it. It also makes you think it'll be much more of a comedy than it is.
I think of Monkey Bone personally.
Yeah, Monkey Bone, Spanking the Monkey. Monkeys are silly. They're silly.
I don't like the term.
That's why silly movies use monkeys in the title.
Yeah. Well, monkey. There you go. But let's rate it, Phil. Let's.
All right. Do you want to go first?
Me?
Yeah. You want me to go first? I'll go first. I'll go first.
All right.
watched the film this morning, coming into this podcast, knowing very little about this film prior to watching it. I gave it a 55 coming into the podcast. I was sort of, I didn't hate it. I felt like I certainly wouldn't tell people not to watch it, but I don't know that it really. I'm not sure that I locked into it. As I mentioned earlier, I found myself sort of just flummoxed by it, and I'm just unsure as to what to think of what they were going for. And then on top of it, the Weinstein elements colored it, and then learning about this director stuff and all of that kind of unfortunately sort of muddied the waters. After this conversation, I've gone up a little bit. I'm at a 65 now. I feel like it's far from a bad movie. I think it's an interesting film. I think the stuff that you highlighted, Kenny, is really interesting and valid. Specifically, the whole erectile dysfunction component that we spoke of earlier at the top. Yeah, Kenny just gave a thumbs up for our listeners, and I just felt like I don't think I gave it its due. I think that it's still messy. I think that the script has still got some serious issues with it. But I think Michael Radford cast it really well, pulled it out in the end, made a better film that I thought perhaps the script deserved. So I'm at a 65. What about you, Kenny?
A lot higher than you.
Yeah, I assumed as much.
I before this podcast, I had it at an 88.
Wow. Okay.
And I wanted it to be quite high on my list. I could see certain things finding its way to the year-end list.
Yeah.
It reminded me a little bit of Guinevere.
Interesting.
Not so much in terms of content, but in terms of tone, in terms of scope, in terms of style, and in terms of ambition, and also in terms of I really, really liked it. And, I would like other people to watch it. That being said, I am less confident that I was before the podcast. I wouldn't recommend this movie full-throatedly like I would have before the podcast. There are certainly elements that I'm uncomfortable with that I wasn't before the podcast. I still think it's a good flick, but I don't think it's anywhere like near. It's certainly not at Guinevere's level. I'm going to go down to an 81. I think I really did like it. I really thought it was really a good movie. Usually I find myself going up to numbers like that. Yeah. But it's, 81. I think it's a good flick. And I do want it to be memorialized as one of the better finds of the year for me.
Okay. Sarah.
Okay, going into this podcast,
yes.
I had settled on the number 60. I feel like that's just like a nice solid, like a passing grade. I wanted to make it like it passed, but I think it's far from being like great. But like it definitely more good than bad.
Right.
Throughout the course of this podcast, my instinct is to take it way down just to be a contrarian. But now I feel like
vindicated.
Since due to the content of this movie, I have brought up a lot about like, well, okay, let's think about, how this is representing women of the queer community. And I feel like I'm being a bit of a stick in the mud. So I'm going to go back to 60. Nice.
Great.
I think, okay. Not to do a plug, but my friend Lenny has a great podcast called The Filmographers, where you watch literally every movie in an actor's repertoire. And I was a guest on twice. It's an endeavor. I think if you were like a big Jared Harris fan, this is a must see. Like I don't think it's a great movie, but like I'm a Jared Harris fan, and I think this is like a really interesting role for him. I will say as a heads up, you see his whole ass.
That's a plus for some people.
Here's the thing.
That's a good ass.
That's a good ass.
Shocked. I was shocked. His skin, flawless. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that flawless skin. But someone
I might show it.
Respects him so much, I kind of wish that I hadn't seen his whole ass. But I do think plenty of people, that would be quite a treat. It's not bad. I'm not saying that. It surprised me. That's all.
Can I point out something that's interesting, Phil?
Please. Yeah.
Like very interesting.
Yeah.
So this movie was co-written. It was written by by Andrew Davies, who is a somewhat prominent British novelist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was his book.
It was his book. Yeah.
And it was his book. And Chloe King. And
writer of Poison Ivy 2, Alyssa Milano vehicle. I've seen that. That I saw in the 90s.
Of course, who hasn't seen that? Yeah.
Not in the 90s. I was a child in the 90s, but...
She also wrote a bunch of episodes of Red Shoe Diaries, which doesn't seem that nice, but to bring up. But she was the assistant to the producers on Drugstore Cowboy, a movie that we'll be doing on our 89 Patreon. We will be doing that on
89, yeah.
Which is pretty cool. I love seeing shit like that.
Funny.
Someone who was an assistant to producers or a writer's assistant or something like that going on and writing, movies. I guess
movies.
This is a big movie. Yeah. But movies and movies that we're covering 22 years later. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's fucking cool. Yeah.
I will say in terms of the female objectification in this movie, as someone who saw Chloe King's other movie, Poison Ivy 2, also just a lot of nudity for absolutely no reason. So I don't necessarily want to put all of that on men.
That's true. That's true. That's something.
Honestly, I want to be clear. I'm not like a total prude. I'm the one who started talking about erections in the sign.
No, you have. I wasn't calling you a prude. Yeah.
I'm always self-conscious about that.
No, that's the most male privilege thing I have is I can be the prudest, and no one will call me being a prude. Somewhat disgusting.
There is a scene very late in this movie, where B Monkey is topless and in boxers and has a gun pointed at someone, and she's like in total control. And I think that's such a great visual, and I almost wish that had been the only scene where we saw her topless, because by then you're kind of
numb to it.
Not you. I'm not going to imagine everyone has the same reaction to seeing a woman naked over and over again as I do, where I'm just like, this is tedious, wrap it up. But I felt like that was so fun, but because it was after so many other naked scenes, it kind of lost its impact, when I think they should have kind of been holding back a bit more for that. That is my opinion on. I think they should have been a little bit more discerning with the nudity in that movie.
to bring it back to erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
That's the pull quote of this episode, by the way. Just to bring it back to erectile dysfunction.
I do
Is this
think
coming up again? Okay.
I do think the audience did have to see her fully nude once in the beginning, so you really had a sense of what you expected Jared Harris's character to do, and the way that was, kind of inverted by what actually happened.
Yeah,
that's it. That's all I got.
And I think, us talking about that, my problem with that storyline really was that it's so immediately dropped.
Yeah.
I said, I think it made perfect sense for him to be kind of overwhelmed and intimidated in that situation, because she really doesn't give him any heads up that that's about to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be overwhelmed by that situation.
Right, yeah. If you're hanging out and someone just takes all their clothes off, you know what? It's a little shocking. I do think that was... maybe that wouldn't have played very well if it had just been, she takes her she takes her shirt off, but she's still wearing a bra, and she's like, come on. I do think, in a PG-13 movie, that scene doesn't really play. It just doesn't really, you need her to be as in your face about it as possible.
She definitely is in your face in this film. There's no question that
there are 2 scenes of him bathing her, and I feel like that's either go for the hat trick or just once. That's my opinion on bathing scenes.
I feel you.
Triple down or don't do it at all.
Yeah. It should have just been him bathing her in different houses. That's the whole movie. I mean, they just travel the countryside bathing in different locations.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Bee Monkey with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We very, very much appreciate it. We hope that you'll come back for something else in the future.
I'd love to be back. Yeah.
I know that
I know that Bee Monkey person.
You are our Bee Monkey person. I know that you're coming on. We're going to do a sports night episode at some point in the future. But thank you again for coming on and talking about this very interesting, complex, messy movie.
It certainly wasn't what I was expecting. I'll say that.
So we do very, very much appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sarah.
We aim to shock.
Thank you again, Sarah.
Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.